Chapter 3 Man or Beast. It had been several days since the scout's death. While the community continued to mourn her passing, the shaman and Thulvox had spent all their time since that night in council. ZostaMax figured they had to be planning something. Rumors about their discussions abounded, each more heinous and crazier than the previous. ZostaMax didn't keep track of the conspiracies. He did his job, took his shift, and quietly stayed at his post. While keeping watch at the tunnel entrance overnight, he kept a low profile, doing his best to fulfill his duties without being noticed, or getting drawn into whatever debate the council was undoubtedly having upstairs. He didn't want to pick sides or get involved. He wasn't the most social of people at the best of times. The only person he truly considered a friend was Ibanez. Few people were willing to associate with ZostaMax, avoiding him on principle, lest their faith in the shaman come under question. Ever since he watched his father get carried off by Balauri, ZostaMax did not feel so faithful to the shaman's word. Thulvox, champion of the guard, accused ZostaMax of negligence, placing the scout's loss on his shoulders. ZostaMax did his best not to think about it. He wondered if they would throw him out, like Magnavoy. Word had spread, though precisely what that word was he didn't know, but the people spat at him, gave him the foulest of looks, or ignored him entirely. He leaned on his spear a few paces out of the watchfire's light. Letting the darkness hide him, he mulled over the relationship he had with the people, or lack thereof. The people shunned him because he didn't unquestioningly and wholeheartedly believe the shaman. He tried to recall the names and faces of the dozen old matriarchs with hazardously long hair. The council of shamans kept themselves sequestered in the upper reaches of Lingrad, only coming out to tell the people that something had or was about to go wrong. Buried in the recesses of the metal tunnels, they saw only their own magics. They lived where the light came from the walls themselves, never venturing into the sun. Their avoidance of the sun was just as well, since its harsh gaze might burn the frail old women to a crisp. The only shaman he had ever met or actually spoken with was Ibanez's mother, Zastava. She was just as cryptic as the others. They always answered a question with another question. ZostaMax's problem now was his refusal to take the shaman's words at face value, as absolute truth. Everyone else thought him a disloyal cheat of some sort. He'd made the mistake of questioning the shaman aloud in a public meeting. ZostaMax had just come of age. He had been one of the hopefuls, waiting for physical maturity before becoming a watchman. It became all the harder for him to wait after the death of his father. He wanted revenge. He wanted to be just like his well-respected father, who at one time had even been friends with Thulvox. This confused him all the more why Thulvox hated him now. The council sent his father, Vladatin, outside by himself to do some menial tasks at the behest of the shaman. He was alone when he found two Balauri sneaking around. He had called for aid and stood to fight them until help arrived. ZostaMax's brother answered the call, but was too late. Both of them died, all because the shaman wanted to know how many lights were lit along the outside of Lingrad. The shaman's debate over building more watchfires or not had cost the lives of both his father and elder brother. To ZostaMax, this served as proof that the shamans weren't all-knowing, as unfathomable and omnipotent as they wanted to be, or as everyone believed they were. Not long after the death of his father, Zastava called a public gathering. She explained a terrible storm was on its way with wind and rain and floods of a magnitude they had never seen before. ZostaMax asked, "How do you know?" A moment of shocked silence passed. Collectively, they ignored him or at best gave him dirty looks. That first time, they gave him some leeway because of the recent loss of the entire male portion of his family. ZostaMax didn't learn from the dirty looks they shot him or how they ignored him. Later, on multiple other occasions, he asked similar questions. "How can you be sure? Why would they need such materials? How do they already know that? The more questions he asked, the more violent the rejections became. Eventually, he learned to keep his mouth shut. A couple of other people secretly speculated upon the same topic ZostaMax did. On a couple of occasions, they spoke in private, but they were mostly just curious, not outright skeptical. As ZostaMax matured physically, he became a full-fledged watchman, following in his father's footsteps. Not long after taking on full watchman responsibilities, they sent him out to count Lingrad's lights too. ZostaMax grudgingly obliged, but made a fuss about it, and found himself drenched in a cold sweat the entire time he wandered Lingrad's rock and sand perimeter while counting the lights. In the nearly 2 years since, and he'd gotten nothing but the cold shoulder. Even the man who had trained him to fight Balaur wanted nothing to do with him any more. He could no longer remember how many lights there were. Now that he stood alone, leaning on his spear, concealed in the darkness beyond the watchfire's rings of lights, that bothered him. He felt he should remember how many there were. His repetitive questioning made the other citizens realize it wasn't some phase, his youth, or hurt on his soul from his shattered family, but genuine doubt. That time, when he questioned the shamans, he went from overlooked to shunned overnight. He lost the few friends he had. No one but Ibanek spoke to him any more, not in the 2 years while he stood watch. He hadn't seen his mother since the night of that assignment, leaving him estranged from his still living mother and sisters. Now, even socially exiled, he had questioned the leaders too vocally to redeem himself, no matter how good of a job he did. An idea crept into his head. He could leave of his own accord. No one would miss him. Why work to protect all the people who cared not for him? Would it be so bad to get physically exiled too? The clouds hung low in the sky that night, covering it from horizon to horizon, keeping the temperature warm and the air humid long into the night by trapping the burning heat of the day. He couldn't see any stars. ZostaMax would watch the stars and wait for their wings of the Balauri to blot them out, his preferred method of spotting them. Not only had this proven a decent method for spotting their winged foe, he had learned many of the constellations, too. Despite the cloud layer blocking his view of the stars, he felt relatively safe for the moment. Buried in the shadow of a boulder he leaned on, hidden from the light of the fire, the wind blowing in his favor. Anything approaching would smell the fire, and not him. ZostaMax was familiar enough with the surroundings he could still differentiate the silhouettes of the rocks and trees despite the dark of night. He had stood in this spot for so many long nights before. He recognized all the silhouettes arrayed before him. He could easily spot if anything was out of place or didn't belong. His mind rolled back to musing over his situation. How the others who had expressed their apprehensions immediately refused to speak to him after he had doubted the shaman's leadership one too many times. Everyone now refused to do business with him, especially anyone with any position of control or responsibility. This made it nearly impossible for ZostaMax to accomplish anything. The shaman asked him to repent. They expected him to make an offering to show his humility and beg for, or earn, forgiveness through bribes, as was the accepted practice for other heretics and transgressors. ZostaMax had scoffed at the idea and stubbornly stuck to his own words, refusing to betray himself. He didn't know what rumors the shaman had spread through the populace on his behalf. He unblinkingly doubled down on his skepticism. The people became convinced he might betray them to a lizard. Some feared him being a watchman. They didn't want him shirking his duty or not fighting the Balauri, worried he might think, "Why do we need to fight them? How do the shamans know they're bad?" ZostaMax whispered these phrases mockingly to himself in the privacy the darkness offered him. He snorted through his nose at the very idea. Everyone had been hurt by the Balauri. Every family had lost someone. To him, it was personal. He held on to his methodical, long fused hatred. Those monsters took both his role models from him. His desire for revenge was a deep, cherry red coal in the blackened depths of his soul's fire pit. This hatred for the Balauri fueled him now, a detailed, meticulous, and prepared loathing. It had let him tolerate his estranged social status, keeping him standing outside on hot days or windy nights, ignoring the community's dogmatic following of the shaman and their word. He had more important, burning thoughts in his mind, a hatred he could never forget, ever present and ever driving. Like that last ember, they would fester on long after the rest of the fire had gone out. Maybe one of the beasts would come calling, and he would get to earn the title of Balaur Slayer. Maybe he would get to avenge his lost family. Briefly, thoughts of his surviving family flashed to the forefront. His mother and younger sister. He hadn't seen either of them in years. His little sister was at that age where she would be growing quickly, and he doubted he would recognize her even if she came to slap him in the face. In the darkness leaning against his rock, he felt small, very alone, and very far from anything that mattered. He whispered gentle words only he could hear in the night's darkness. Maybe I am too stubborn for my own good, but I don't see how they expect every single person to be led by the nose, blindly following what the shamans tell them. Who gave them the authority? Who gave them the magic? Why did they send my father out by himself? A noise interrupted his thinking, a faint whisper, a distant whistle, easy to pick out against the silence of the still night. The day's heat, trapped by the heavy clouds, was still oppressive, long after sunset. He had heard the noise before. Air only sounded like that when beat under the wings of Balauri. ZostaMax immediately thought of the other watchmen on shift with him. No man stood guard alone, least of all a no-good traitor like himself. He filled his chest to capacity, sucking air in. ZostaMax broke the silence with a warning to the others. He shouted with such force his voice broke. It pained him to breathe afterward, but no one could ever doubt him this time, his call ringing deep into the tunnels of Leningrad. Balauri!